Hello everyone, welcome to Working with Hosted Feature Layer Views and Public Data. My name is Paul Barker, I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS Online team, and I'm joined today with Lauren Ballantyne, who's also a product engineer on the ArcGIS Online team. So with that, let's dive right in. So just taking a quick look at the agenda today, we're going to be talking about, in general, the main topic here is sharing data to the public and what we need to consider. We're going to take you through some performance tips and optimizations that you can apply to squeeze out a little bit of extra performance in some of the more demanding cases, and talk about best practices. I'm going to give a brief overview of hosted feature layer views, and then Lauren's going to take you through an example that showcases how views can be used in a practical example using Survey 123 and a variety of other apps. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's coming down the pipe and what's next. So, sharing to the public really forces you to ask a lot of important questions. And for many of you that are working with governments, state agencies, provincial regulatory bodies, even private industry through public consultation, sharing to the public plays a vital role. But it also forces a number of key questions, like I mentioned. You need to consider what the public needs to see from the information that you've collected. Not all of it is appropriate for them to see from a privacy perspective. Maybe some of it just isn't relevant to them, and it's data and information used for internal management only. You need to consider whether they need to be able to add or update information, outside of soliciting feedback from them through a survey. It really doesn't make sense for them to edit that information, and nor does it make sense for you. That creates a really risky situation where the public can edit your data, and if your data is considered authoritative, that can create a lot of problems if people edit and change data that shouldn't be changed. So it also forces you to kind of ask questions like, what's my management workflow? How am I going to update that data and still share it to the public effectively? In the past, prior to views, quite often the pattern was you'd have your authoritative piece of information, you'd manage that in isolation, and then you would periodically export it and update a different data set. So there was a disconnect there. And it was always this push model and overwrite, which works, but it still creates a lot of extra overhead. You've got to track two different data sets. You're paying double the storage costs in those scenarios. So it's not ideal from a hosting perspective. And then, last but not least, I think a really important part that sometimes gets lost in the rush is, what is the best experience for users? So what's the right app to share this information with them? How do I create a great pop-up to really convey the right information or the most important information, and what's the right experience within that pop-up? Should the information be in a chart? Is it more valuable as a list of attributes? Can I just substitute attributes into an existing paragraph or sentence to make it more readable? So those are all important questions for the public, because if they're not engaged, they're really not going to digest that information, and it might miss the mark. So let's talk about performance and optimization and best practices. So when you share to the public and your data is read-only, caching is enabled by default. And what that really means is that if you as the owner or admin, who can always edit the data, makes changes, the public may not see that information for up to 30 seconds by default. There's some nuances there, but it's generally count on 30 seconds as the delay. So you can adjust this value on the hosted feature layer to change it and increase it as required. So if your data isn't changing very frequently, you could opt to increase it to maybe a couple hours and things like that. So if you really want to squeeze a little bit more performance out of things. I want to call out editable data. I talked about that in the last slide, but I really want to hit home, discouraging sharing data publicly that's editable unless you absolutely have that requirement. So one of the side effects of that sharing editable data public is that much of the benefit of our internal caching is lost. when the data is editable. So you're not getting all that scalability benefit, you're not getting that extra responsiveness when you're sharing it to the public. Then, last but not least, there's the whole data integrity issue. If your public can edit your data and you didn't plan for that, you get all kinds of unintended consequences. So really don't want to do that unless it's a requirement. And we've done a lot of work in the user experience in ArcGIS Online to discourage you. I guess discourage might be the wrong word. So to encourage you to ask that really important question before sharing to the public. And so we do have a new setting on the feature layers item page where you actually have to approve the layer to be shared to the public when it's editable, just to kind of force that extra checklist and steps to make sure that you don't accidentally share something editable you don't intend to. So you can also optimize your data for drawing if it's a line or a polygon. So one of the things that we can do here is you can create multi-scale geometries, and for those of you familiar in the raster space, is very akin to pyramids in that we generate simplified geometries at varying scales, and as you zoom in and zoom out, it leverages those simplified geometries, so they draw faster. There's less information to transfer over the browser, and things like that. You'll excuse my typo on my screenshot there. That should say subtype, but spelling's not my strong suit. So those are some of the tips and tricks and best practices and performance considerations when sharing to the public. Let's talk specifically about how views come into play. All of the tips here on this page apply to both the regular feature layer as well as the view. So let's dive in and just look at views conceptually before I hand you over to Lauren to give a great demo. So views are really a different perspective into an existing data set. So you publish your feature layer, and from your feature layer you can create one or more views. And those views point back to the same data set, but you can apply a really strict filter on that data in each of the views. So you can restrict it geographically through an area of interest. You can hide fields from the web apps using them. You can pass a SQL query basically and as a definition query to restrict that data based on some criteria. For example, whether something's been reviewed or not. All of those are enforced back to the service or REST level. So even if the user takes that layer's URL, adds it to a new map, those things are honored. If that user exports the data, if you support exporting, they will only get the filtered view. So the other nice thing about views is that you can have independent sharing and independent capabilities for the most part. So I can have a private layer that's fully editable that I use to manage the data. I can share a read-only view to the public, and then I can actually have a survey if I wanted to engage the public where they could only add information and not see the existing information. And then share that back to the public through a third view. Share that internally to my organization for data reviewers to be able to look at the new data and flag things as public ready. So that's conceptually how a view works, and with that, I'm going to hand you over to Lauren, who's going to walk you through a demo.
Thanks, Paul. Hi guys, Lauren here. As Paul mentioned, I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS Online team, and I'm going to show you an example of how views can be used for public data collection. In this example, the City of Ottawa wants to host a citywide biodiversity hunt, in which citizens are encouraged to go out into their neighborhoods to record plant and animal sightings. There are many ways to collect this data. The simplest would be to create a public app with an editable hosted feature layer wired for public data collection, but that option isn't ideal since it can lead to data integrity problems, such as accidental feature deletion, and it limits your ability to hide information such as irrelevant fields or private information. Views help you overcome such issues by allowing you to curate what users can see and do with your data. So for this biodiversity hunt, we need to determine who needs access to the data, what data they need access to, and how we want to collect that data. There will be two groups involved in the citywide biodiversity hunt, since the aim of the biodiversity hunt is to gather public data and get the public outside. The first who is the public. The second who are data reviewers. The reviewer's role is to ensure that a sighting is accurate and doesn't contain any inappropriate information before the sighting is made visible to the public. Now that we've figured out who can access the data, we need to determine what data each group can access. The public will need two views on the data. The first being a view for public submissions. This view will allow the public to add new sightings, but not see them since they haven't been reviewed yet. The second public view will be a read-only view of all the reviewed sightings. The third and final view will be for reviewers. This view will show sightings pending review. Reviewers will be able to update and delete sightings based on their quality and content. Now let's move on to the how. I'm going to utilize Survey123 for data collection, ArcGIS Online for hosting the data, Mappier Beta for sighting validation and public data visualization, and finally an instant app for presenting the biodiversity hunt results to the public. In this example, I'm using Survey123 for data collection because Survey123 can create add-only query-disabled view layers that allow attachments. This functionality is not currently supported for views created in ArcGIS Online, and since the data reviewers will need photos for species validation, Survey123 is ideal for this workflow. Now that we've addressed the who, what, and how of this example, let's dive into how to implement this workflow so that the City of Ottawa can start collecting biodiversity data. Here is a preview of the survey that I've created. The public will need to enter the species name, species category, date and time of the sighting, photos for species validation, and the location of the sighting. I'm going to exit this preview, and then I'm going to go into the Collaboration Settings tab. I'm going to make sure that the survey link asks the user if they want to open it in the browser or in the Survey123 field app. This just creates more flexibility and allows the user to access the survey in whatever way they would like. I'm also sharing the survey to the public, and then I'm also only allowing them to add new records because I don't want the public to be able to update or delete any records. I'm also allowing the survey include multiple submissions, as the public will probably see multiple species during their hunt. I'm going to leave the rest of the default settings, save the survey, and then publish it. But for sake of time, I have already published the survey and added some sample data so that we can have a better understanding of each view's role. Once the survey is published, a new folder is added to your contents page in ArcGIS Online. Here is what Survey123 publishes with each survey: a copy of the survey form, two views, and a hosted feature layer that's the source of the views. Before I get into configuring my views, I need to configure my source hosted feature layer. After publishing the survey, I added a new non-nullable field called status, and I gave it a default value of P for pending. And as you can see, the default value ensures that new submissions are automatically assigned a status of P, so that the reviewers know which sightings need to be reviewed. This is good, but I need the reviewers to be able to change the status to verified, and a way to ensure that the status's values are restricted to either pending or verified. To do this, I'll add a coded value domain to the status field. And so I'll navigate to the fields view, scroll down to status, click create list, and assign the value pending to the coded value P and verified to the coded value V. And click save. And now you can see we have a domain for pending and verified. And if we go to the table view, status only has an option of pending or verified. The next step is to configure our views. So go back to the content, into our survey folder. You'll see that Survey 123 automatically created 2 views. The field worker view is generated upon survey creation and is used to manage permissions for submission to the survey as a non-owner. And the stakeholder view is generated upon modifying sharing settings and is used to manage permissions for viewing the survey as a non-owner. Since the field worker view is for managing submissions, I'm going to look at its settings to ensure that it's set up properly for add-only public data collection. First, I'm going to change its name to something that's a little bit more meaningful to the project, like public collection. I'm also going to make sure it's shared to the public, and it is. You'll notice this yellow warning banner that's warning me that the layer is editable and shared to the public. But since I want to be able to collect data from the public with this layer, I can click Allow Data Collection here, or I can go to the Settings page and approve it for data collection here in the General section and press Save. I'm also going to scroll down to ensure that the rest of the view is configured how I want it. It is editable, and it does only allow submissions to be added. If I wasn't using a survey or a form to collect the public data, I'd also configure the view so that the public can't see any features, even those they have added themselves, since their submissions will need to be reviewed before they're ready for public viewing. Now that we've figured out the public collection view, we can move on to the reviewer view. We'll go back to the content folder and click on the stakeholder view. I'm also going to change the name of this view to, again, something that's more meaningful to us. Change it to reviewer. And then I'm going to share my view to my organization, assuming that my organization employs the reviewers. You'll remember that I added a field called status to the source listed feature layer. So when I navigate to the data tab of this view, you'll notice that the field is visible. I want to highlight a slight difference between views created in ArcGIS Online and Survey 123. If I had created the view in ArcGIS Online and added a field to the source hosted feature layer after creating the view, then the new field would have been hidden by default. Views created through Survey 123 automatically make new fields visible on the view layers, regardless of if the field was added after they were created. Now I need to configure the reviewer's view so that it only shows sightings that are pending. So go to the Visualization tab, click on More Options, set View Definition, Define Features, and I'll add an expression where status is pending, and I'll click Apply Definition. With the definition set up, I need to now make sure that the reviewers have the right editable capabilities. So I'm going to enable editing, and I only want the reviewers to be able to delete and update features. And I'll click Save. The last piece for the viewers is a web map. Location of a sighting is an important part of determining the validity of a sighting. Also, the reviewers will need access to the editor widget to perform updates and to delete features when necessary. I've gone ahead and created a web map using Map Viewer Beta, so let's take a look. The map shows the sightings that are currently pending review. As a reviewer, I might click on a feature to open its pop-up and see what the user has submitted. And look, the user has misspelled the species name. As a reviewer, I would want to update this before verifying the sighting. So I click on the layer to activate it, and then click on the editor widget and edit feature. I'll close the pop-up and then select the feature that I want to edit. Now I'll change the name, make sure everything else makes sense, change the status from pending to verified, and then click Update. You'll notice that the feature is now no longer shown on the map, and that's because this map is configured to only show sightings that are pending review. Now I'll tackle the final view, which is the view that'll show the public verified siting. Since Survey 123 only created 2 views, I'll need to create the third using the ArcGIS Online workflow. I'll go to the overview page of the hosted feature layer and click Create View Layer. I'll give it a name, some tags, and a summary, and click OK. Now I'll share the layer to the public, and I'll need to configure it so that it only shows verified sightings. So I'll go to the Visualization tab and set another definition where status is verified. I'm also going to set a field definition so that some fields aren't, not all fields are shown. I don't want the creator dates, creator editor, or the status field shown. These fields would show reviewer names, usernames, and they don't add value for the public, therefore they shouldn't be visible. I should mention that setting a definition is different than setting a filter in a web map. A definition is very strict and is enforced to the REST endpoint, whereas a filter is set on the web map, making it more superficial and easier for someone to remove. And since I want something strict, I'm using definitions. Finally, I'm going to go and check the settings page to make sure that this layer is read-only. And it is. Editing is not enabled. The final step in this workflow is to create a web application that the public can use to view the biodiversity results data. Before I can make a web application, I need to create a web map. So I'll open Map Viewer Beta and set the base map to the imagery hybrid, and zoom into our study area. And I want to preserve the scale so that the user always sees the Ottawa area when they view the map. I'm also going to add some styling for the species category so that the user can see what kind of species are around in the city. I'll save the map. And save. Now to create the web application. There are several web applications that I can use to present the results of the biodiversity hunt. I could configure a dashboard and utilize the widgets to present some findings like the most common cited species. I could also create a story map if I wanted to provide the citizens with some more background information about Ottawa's urban forests and its conservation projects, in addition to the results of the biodiversity hunt. I could also go a simpler route and use an instant app and share that app to the public. I've gone ahead and already configured an instant app using the interactive legend template so that you didn't have to watch me configure it. So here is an example of how you can present your publicly collected and expert verified data in an interactive way without the fear of accidental data loss or exposing confidential information. I hope you've enjoyed this demo and are now excited to give hosted feature layer views a try. I would like to wrap the session up by mentioning what's next for views. We're working on creating a new view authoring experience that will allow you to create a view from one or more feature services or through a join, as well as setting the view definitions within the Create View workflow. We're also going to include a workflow that will allow you to switch a view's source layer, instead of having to rely on overwriting to update the source layer's data. Thanks again for joining Paul and I for the session on working with hosted feature layer views and public data.